Hello, and thank you for downloading audio from Crosspoint Church. To find out more about Crosspoint, visit us online at www.crosspointga.com.
We are going to be talking for the next 2 weeks about anxiety. Now, this is something that I've been really looking into for quite a while and just praying about and seeking the Lord as to when to start doing this. And man, pastorally, a lot of the way my message development is trying to assess where the congregation is and where our people are. And over this year, over the past, really 12 months going into even last year, I've seen anxiety really growing within, not just connected to some of you within our congregation, but even outside of it. Through prayer requests that have been coming into me and people asking me to pray for different family members and different individuals in regards to anxiety. And so over the next 2 weeks, we're gonna be looking into this. And I think I can get through today's. I've got a lot in here to unpack. But I think that we can really assess where that is. Now, anxiety tends to manifest itself in three particular categories. And those are family, finances, and future. Now, if you think back to any anxiety that you've ever had in your life, it tends to be around those relationships, tends to be around your finances, and most of the time, for me, I'd have to say mine tends to focus on the future. Because I'm a planner, I'm a type A guy, I'm always trying to forecast down, and I tend to get anxiety about the future. And so if you can resonate with any of those, just slip your hand up. You're like, yeah, I've had okay, yeah. So we're all right. Nobody here's got it all together. We're a church where it's okay to not be okay. You don't have to have it all together to be assimilated into this church. Even the pastor doesn't have it all together. So there was a study that I was in, and I'm gonna post a lot of this stuff on our Facebook page in case I forget to say that. At 11:20. There is going to be a Facebook post that's going to go live that has some of the stats and information that I'm sharing with you that you could go back and listen to and share with other individuals. And then this message will post on Monday if it's good. If it's not, I don't post it. So I reserve that right. Anyway, a national core mobility study was published in 2018. Core mobility meaning diseases within a person of one or more. So if you have one disease, you weren't in this study, but if you have two, they did a study and they were around anxiety and depression. And what they found was, now, and here's the thing, that this is skewed actually for people within the age group of 18 to 34, if I remember correctly. But in so doing, they found that 1 in 5 have met the criteria for an anxiety disorder. Not just having anxiety, but it's to the level of disorder. 1 in 3 will experience an anxiety disorder in their lifetime. Now you may say, okay, but think about that age bracket from 18 to 34, okay? That is really, really significant. And they also found that on college campuses, anxiety surpasses depression as the main mental health problem. So when you see anxiety and you talk just in my sphere of influence, I'm seeing anxiety growing, that resonates nationally as well. Not just on a local level for where we are, but all over the place. Now here's the thing. So I was listening to, and what I'm posting on social media, and I'll have the addresses that you can find it towards the end of the sermon and the service, is I was listening to Dr. Caroline Leaf, who is a neurosurgeon. Still practicing, actually. She's doing some, I forget what they're called now, tests or whatever they do. I forgot the name of what those are. But the labs and stuff like that, still active, still practicing. And she was talking about anxiety from a standpoint of a disorder level. Now, here's the issue, is that nationally what we're seeing, and I don't know if you're familiar with the biomedical approach, but the biomedical approach to diseases and disorders is that you see symptoms with an individual, you investigate it, and then you treat it with a drug or surgery, and then it's cured. That's the biomedical approach. It's heavily reliant on medical procedures to solve the problem. Now, what's happening in medicine nowadays is that we're seeing an uptick of anxiety, particularly on the disorder level. And in her opinion, she said that is because the biomedical approach and the biomedical approach alone is being applied to anxiety. But there is a lot more to anxiety than just the physical. And so if you just look at anxiety from a physical standpoint and you look at it as, okay, let's treat it with drugs and cure it and you're done, you're never going to really handle anxiety from both the smaller and the disorder level. Now, here's why. What you have to really do is look at anxiety for what it really is. Anxiety is something that is part and is affected by a holistic aspect of who we are as a person. Now, you have to remember, if you are not a Christian, you tend to look... some people may or may not being Christians, but if you take a hardline approach and saying, okay, me as a person, I'm made up of my body, and after I die, nothing else happens. But we as believers, when we look into the scriptures, we see that there's a lot more to us as individuals than just the body. There's body, soul, mind, and spirit, the holistic approach to who we are as an individual. And that is that I have an intellect or a mind, I have a physical body, I have a spirit, and I have an immortal soul. I'm emotional, I'm spiritual, I'm physical, I'm intellectual, all those combined. And that the issues that we have with anxiety are far more than just the physical. Now, what does a drug do? A drug tends to mess with and treat physical ailments, okay? So if you have a sinus infection, there's not a whole lot spiritually going on with that. And we can pray for that and intercede and see the Lord do a work on the emotional side. But when it comes to anxiety hits all of these. Anxiety is hitting you physically. Anxiety is hitting you spiritually, emotionally, and even intellectually. Anxiety is one of those things that is indwelling and manifesting itself in so many different areas, which is why people who simply go to a doctor and try and handle it with a pill are still having issues with anxiety after the medication. Why? Because the medication is suppressing and not actually curing when it comes to that. Now, here's what I want to say first off. When it comes to medication, we don't shame people who take insulin, right, to treat their ailments and to treat their diabetes. We don't shame people who take antibiotics to cure an infection. We don't shame people who are on cancer treatments to treat their cancer. And there are issues and there are times when medication is needed for mental health. Okay? However, what I will push back at as a pastor is completely ignoring the spiritual, intellectual, and emotional components that make up who we are as individuals. Because the scriptures have a lot to say about anxiety. And that I don't believe that you can be cured of anxiety from just a biomedical approach alone. And I think there is a disservice to us as individuals if we look at it from simply that standpoint. And what we have to do is look at anxiety for what it really is. What really is it? Anxiety is a signal. Anxiety is a signal to you and me that something is off. Right? It's just like the check engine light on your car. And if you get in your car and you see that check engine light pop up, you're like, okay, that's telling me something's going on with my vehicle. But some of you are a little more apt to do this than others, but you just keep driving it, right? You're like, well, it's still running, so I'm good. It's fine. It's making funny sound, but it's still driving. Please don't do that, especially if you're in my car. But but anxiety is a signal. Anxiety is a signal that something isn't quite right. Now, case in point, let's just say I had anxiety about preaching my anxiety sermon. Okay, it could happen. If you've ever stood up before people and presented anything, if you've ever got those butterflies in your stomach, okay? Those butterflies in your stomach are an indicator of something. Now, here's the deal. Let's say I'm preaching or I'm on stage at a national level, right? And I'm on live TV. I've got 5,000 people, and I'm preaching at Andy Stanley's church in Atlanta. Okay, and I've never spoke at that level, and I have butterflies in my stomach. Here's what happened. That is anxiety. For me, that's anxiety. Now, it's not at the disorder level, but it is anxiety, and that is a signal to me. Okay, and what's happening is my sympathetic system within my nervous system is telling me something. And what it's telling me, and when my sympathetic nervous system engages, that is that fight or flight aspect of my physical body. Okay? What that does is that prepares me for intense physical activity. Right now, let's see what my heart rate is. Well, it hasn't measured. But generally, when I'm preaching at a resting heart rate, when I'm like just standing there, my heart rate's at around 70. My heart rate right now is probably at around 100 to 110. It's like I am at a jog when I preach, because I am moving, and many of you you feel like you're in a tennis match because I walk so much, right? So my body is engaged and I'm doing a lot. My sympathetic nervous system is engaged. My parasympathetic nervous system is feeding off of the sympathetic nervous system, and that is the parasympathetic is that digestive system type thing, right? That is all the stuff that moves within your body that you never really have to tell it to engage. For instance, digestion, right? You just eat stuff and that thing automatically kicks in and your body digests, which is why kids don't swim 30 minutes after eating, right? Because there's a lot going on in there. You've ever heard that? All of that is automatic. Your mind and body do that without you engaging. You don't have to say, all right, I'm about to eat, so let's get that thing cranking down there so we can digest our food. So when I have anxiety about preaching and I have butterflies in my stomach, my parasympathetic nervous system is engaging because of the anxiety and the stress. Now, when that is happening, that's a signal to me that, okay, my body's doing something that it really shouldn't. And I need to address that, right? Now, you prolong this. You prolong this. And go into this approach that we have when it comes to anxiety. And you look at people at the anxiety disorder level. They can't sleep. They have cold sweats. They have stomach issues, right? They have irregular bowel movements because of the anxiety in their lives. When you get into that disorder and you have chronic anxiety, this is getting out of hand. And none of us want to live like this. But people who have chronic anxiety are seeing all of this stuff engage. And from a spiritual standpoint, it's completely ignored. So people begin to treat these systems. Okay, you can't sleep, we're going to give you Ambien. Okay, you have irregular bowel movements and your stomach issues. We're going to give you the purple pill, right? We're going to give you this. We're going to give you that. And all of this is trying to handle and negate all that stuff. You can't sleep. You got anxiety and you're having panic attacks. All right, we're going to give you a Xanax and we're just going to calm you down. Smoke a little of something or this or that. And all of these symptoms. Now, here's the deal. None of that ever stops because all you're treating is the symptoms. And spiritually speaking, this is a real problem because all drugs and all of the other things that you're doing to take the edge off of the anxiety that is in your life are simply suppressing them. All they're doing is suppressing what is already there. And suppression is a big problem. So here's the classic approach that we have to stress and anxiety. Well, you just need to deal with it. Just toughen up, buddy. You need to deal. Now, we do that because we all know at the most common level, anxiety is a way of life. If you try and remove anxiety out of your life completely, you're going to absolutely never accomplish a thing. The goal is not to remove anxiety out of our lives, right? Okay? If we had no anxiety in our life, you would earn no living. You'd have absolutely nothing to accomplish or conquer. Why? Because every single one of us have anxiety at some level. When you go to work tomorrow, there is a level of stress and anxiety that is there because that's why you're paid for it. Right? If it wasn't hard, you wouldn't get paid for it. There would be no need, no necessity for any of that. There is anxiety in your life and in mine. The problem is the way we deal with it. And that comes from suppression. And when we're suppressing anxiety, all of this begins to come up. How many of you have seen the Facing the Giants movie? Okay. Do you remember the scene where they're always walking into the house and they smell something like, oh man, what is that smell? What is that smell? And later on they pull the rats out of the air ducts, and Clay's laughing because he's like, yeah, I've seen those before. Call me for that. But yeah, you've seen, right? And we've had that in our life in places where we live, where there's just like the smell sometimes, and something either crawled under the house or got into the attic, and you're just like, where is the smell? Everything looks clean, right? The house looks good, everything's swept and mopped and all in order, but there's a smell for some reason. And you go into the closet or you go into the air ducts, and what you find is something dead. And here's the problem. And here's what I know about you and I know about me. That at some point in your life, you have suppressed something. That there is something that has happened in your life. There is a problem. There was something that brought anxiety into your life. And instead of dealing with it, you shoved it in a closet. And whether it's 20 days or 20 years later, the decay happens. And no one evades the smell. Why? Because when you shove something in a corner of your heart or in the corner of your house that's toxic and decaying and dying, it smells the whole place up. And what you're seeing with your anxiety is that the things that you've suppressed over your lifetime, that you've failed to deal with, that you failed to bring under authority and under the power of God, or even at the simplest biomedical level, are affecting you. And they're causing a stench and a smell and a toxicity in your whole entire life. Look, my finger's small, but if I let it get infected and I don't deal with it, it's going to mess with my entire body. Why? Because our fates are intertwined. My finger's attached to me. It shares the same resources, proteins, nerves, blood, all of that. It's a small little thing, and I could hide it behind my back. I could shove it in my pocket. And that is the idea that so many people take when it comes to spiritual issues. Now, next week, we're going to unpack some more of what those are. Things like unforgiveness and resentment and bitterness and all of the things that come in. But for the sake of time, I want to deal with at the spiritual level and at the emotional level, how you handle anxiety. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into 1 Samuel chapter 1, and we're going to look at a story here of a particular woman whose name is Hannah. We're going to pick up in verse 1. Now, there was a certain man of Ramathiah of Zoram, of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanan, the son of Joram, the son of Ilu, the son of Torah, the son of Zuaph, and the son of Ephraim. And he had 2 wives, and the name of the one is Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. And we're going to call her Penny, because I really hate saying her name the rest of the sermon. So Penny had children, but Hannah had no children. Now, here's the thing. You got to put yourself, anytime you read the scriptures, it's very important to go from our day and age, our town, to their town. Now, what did it look like back then? Now, nowadays, everybody says kids are a burden, right? Kids cost too much or too hard to raise. Of course, people at Crosspoint haven't yet got that because many of you have a lot of kids. But back then, kids meant everything. They meant financial security. They meant the ability to feed your family because it was an agrarian society and everything was based on crops. And the more kids you had, the more people you could put in the field without having to pay them, right? Amen. And so you put those kids into the field and they can bring in more crops. You can plant more. You can harvest more. And food meant life, meant substance, meant economic gain because you traded. I've got corn and we've got okra and we're going to trade this and swap this. And that's the way you sustained yourself. It also meant protection. Because if there were people who were attacking your farm or your family, your kids, particularly your boys, would stand at the gap or at the gate, so to speak, as the scriptures say, and they would engage the enemy on your behalf, protecting your livelihood, your livestock, and ultimately your lives. They meant security in old age, because as you aged, there was no government safety net, there were no homes and things like that. It was your family took care of you. And so if you didn't have any kids, you were in a bad way. So all of this mattered. All of this is weighing in on the story that we see here with Hannah and her family. Now, verse 3. Oh, and let me just say this too. When it comes to this polygamy, this more than one wife, and you say, okay, I see this in here and the Bible doesn't really get on to anybody or anything like that, what you'll see, and every time you read the scriptures, just look, anytime there's a guy with more than one wife, while he's not reprimanded for it, that boy is reaping what he sowed, buddy. Let me just tell you right now, he has got some hairy scenarios going on within his life. So while this was permitted, it was not blessed. God's plan has always been one man, one woman for a lifetime. Verse 3, this man went up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Also, the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. And whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Penny, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. Okay, so we see that she had sons and daughters, so she's got quite a bit of kids. But Hannah, he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. But let me just say this, is that God is sovereign, and he has reasons why he allows and does not allow things to happen within the life of Hannah. And we'll see that God is good and gracious to her on the back end of this passage. And her rival, who was Penny, provoked her severely to make her miserable because the Lord had closed her womb. And so it was year by year when she went up from the house of the Lord that she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. Now let's talk about Hannah and her anxiety. What would it look like for a woman in her day and age? What are the voices that are speaking into Hannah in her anxiety? Because she had it. And everywhere she went, everybody knew that Hannah doesn't have kids. And man, that's how you got status back then as a lady, is how many kids you were able to give to your family. Society was telling her, and everyone at the temple, right, as she went to church, everybody was talking about her. And then she had Penny bringing in the competition, and you know, I'm able to give my husband kids and you can't. And, you know, oh, Johnny, you want to know where Hannah's kids are? Hannah, where are your kids? You don't have any? Oh, I'm so sorry for that. Okay, kids, let's go. Let's find Daddy. You know, all of this, all the things speaking, you know, why is God not giving me kids? Is it because I wouldn't be a good mother? Is that why God is not blessing me with kids? Maybe it's because I wouldn't be a good mom. Maybe, I have absolutely no purpose. I have no purpose as a woman. I mean, we have servants to do all the housework. You know, Elkanah's doing pretty good financially. He's got the ability to give her a double portion, which means that he's a man of some substance. And so Hannah's got no purpose at all. There's really nothing for her to do. She's got that whole Penny and Hannah thing of who decorates the house a certain way. And it's just a constant stressful battle for her. Have I done something wrong? Is there sin in my life that is saying why God would not bless me with kids? And so in the midst of all of these voices and all of these things speaking into Hannah's life, fear and anxiety just begin to manifest themselves. I'll never have kids. I'll never have kids. What is it going to look like for me? Okay, if my husband dies, I'm completely out. All the property, all of the wealth in our family would go to Penny's kids. That was their societal structure. Land and property didn't pass to the woman, it passed to the children. And so if Elkanah dies, which is possible, Hannah's destitute. No one's going to marry her. She's barren. So what does she do? Most cases, she'd have to turn to a life of prostitution. That was her only option in this day and age. All of this speaking and bearing down on Hannah's life. Now, can you relate to any of that? See, so many times we think these heroes we read in the Bible that, man, everything's just hunky-dory. These are real people with real problems. And all of it was weighing in on her. And Hannah, like many of us, turned to suppression. She began to suppress all of the things that were going on in her life. And it begins to manifest itself in the coming verses. But it's so important, and I want you to just think of this, is that the long-term pain and suffering by suppressing emotions is far greater than the short-term pain of confronting them. And here's the deal. There is a time in a season where you need to shove some things in a box, right? And deal. And I get that. If you're on a military battlefield, man, us guys, we're compartmentalized a little more. You know, men are like waffles and women are like spaghetti. Your emotions just kind of touch, everything. Us guys, we tend to compartmentalize things and shove things in boxes. And that's handy on a battlefield. But you see so many guys coming back with PTSD and all of these things because if you shove those emotions in boxes, eventually if you don't take them out and deal with them, they begin to permeate and smell and bring toxic things into so many of the things in our lives. And we see this in Hannah. Hannah is shoving things in a box. She's not dealing with Penny. She's not addressing the voices that are speaking into her life. And so we see here in verse 8 that Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? And while the temptation is to say about the husband, he just don't get it, right? Men just don't get it. And while there's an element of truth to that, here's the reality. Is Hannah had something good. She had the love of her husband. Penny actually was a little bit devoid of some of this because we see that her husband, Elkanah, is showing some favoritism to Hannah. And it's probably why Penny's her rival and justing and making her life miserable. And that so many times people with anxiety and people who suppress their emotions actually can't have the ability to even be thankful for the good things that are in their life. Why? Anxiety leading to depression tends to permeate and color everything we see. And all Hannah could see is the fact that she has no kids. She couldn't take joy in the fact that her husband had some substance and they were doing well financially. She couldn't take joy in the fact that she didn't have to do a lot of the work around the house, that they had servants for it. She couldn't take joy in the fact that her husband was giving her a double portion and that when she is at the temple, all the other people are seeing, man, she's got a little bit extra. She's got something going on there. She couldn't see any of the good things. And if you're here this morning and you're struggling with anxiety, ask yourself this, is that true of you? Can you not find joy in your kids anymore? Can you not find joy in your business or your status in your career because of the anxiety and fear and despair that is encroaching in on you? When you pick up the Bible, it doesn't speak to you anymore. When you pray, it just doesn't seem to resonate. You can't even really find joy at church anymore. People are lifting hands and worshiping, and you're like, yeah, I don't know what the big deal is. Could it be that there's some things that have been suppressed in your life that are sucking and taking the joy out of everything that you see and do all around you? That was the case with Hannah. And we see this. That's why her husband is asking, why are you crying? Why are you so grieved? This is a time of joy. We're at the temple. We do this once a year. This is the time where we connect with God. And the Holy of Holies is right there. The presence of God is right there, just across a couple curtains from us. She couldn't find any joy in it. Verse 9, so Hannah arose after they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat of the doorpost of the tabernacle of the Lord, which is generally what a priest do. They're at the church, they're ministering, they're praying. And she was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. This is her anxiety at its worst. She's not eating. She's probably not sleeping. She has no joy. Everything is collapsing in on her, where she is in bitterness of soul. You ever been there? Where, and the Bible uses the word soul because it's meaning the very essence of who we are. Everything of who we are, our very soul. Our soul makes us live from the inside out. And when the soul is not right, nothing else is. There's even actually studies that show, and the Bible even talks about the fact that a merry heart does good like a medicine. That if you're good on the inside, it tends to affect the outside. Again, that's going to the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. That all of these things, Hannah is just she can't sleep, she can't eat, she's depressed, she's finding no joy. Her body's probably riddled with all sorts of ailments. And she is just in bitterness of soul. In verse 11, then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. Hannah makes a vow here before God. And I don't want to focus so much on the vow, but the contents of it this morning. And here's why. In the midst of her praying and her desire for a child, she comes to the point where she says this is not for me anymore, God. This is for you. See, all this time I've been thinking about my needs and my own personal kingdom. And she says at this point in the bitterness of her soul that she is blending her desire for a child to the fact that she will advance God's kingdom with it. That she will give this child back to the Lord. Now think about what that means. There's gravity in this. Because a child that she gives back to the Lord and says, all right, this kid's going into your service. I'm going to give this kid to you. This kid's not going to be able to give me any financial security. This child is not going to be able to handle my protection issues. This child is not going to be someone that ensures my benefit all the days of my life like Penny's kids will. This is a kid, God, that I want to advance your kingdom and not mine. She has a change of heart in the midst of this as she is emptying her soul to God. She acknowledges the anxiety. She acknowledges all of this, and she's just giving all of these things over. Now, in the midst of it, there's a process that we see in Hannah's life that if you go to the resources that I'm posting this afternoon, it walks you through a process that generally works like this from a medical and from a psychological standpoint. Dr. Leaf goes through a process where you acknowledge your anxiety, you verbalize it, you plan its end, and all of that is happening here with Hannah, where she is pouring out her soul. She's unlocking doors that have been locked for years. She's opening, she's going into the ductwork, and she's pulling all of these things that have been stinking and just manifesting and bringing toxicity into her life. And she, through the power of God and through opening, through prayer, she is unpacking all of this. Verse 12, now it happened as she continued praying there for the Lord, to the Lord, that Eli the priest was watching her mouth. Okay, so we see that now Hannah spoke in her heart, but only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. And so therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, how long will you be drunk? Put away your wine from you. Now Eli, and here's why. Eli's not used to seeing this kind of prayer. Right? Everybody who was going to their church is a lot like the people who come to our church. You guys you're all put together. Right? Nobody's crying. Nobody's mascara is running. You know, our hair is all nice and done up. We're not praying and just not caring how we look and all that. Hannah hasn't eaten. She's not sleeping very well. She's looking pretty natty, right? And she's out there crying and weeping. And Eli's thinking, this is a drunk woman. And she needs to get on out of here because he's not used to that kind of prayer. He's used to the put together, oh Lords and thous, and everybody's praying in King James, even though they really hadn't had the King James Version then yet. Right? He's used to those kind of prayers. And here's Hannah, and she's just falling apart. And he's resonating with this and saying, this is different, and his attention is drawn to her. Now listen to her response. But Hannah answered, verse 15, and said, no, my Lord, lowercase l, I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drank neither wine nor intoxicating drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman. Don't miss this. For out of the abundance of my complaint and grief, I have spoken until now. Here is what I see when I talk to people with anxiety. Is most of their prayers contain complaints. Most of their conversations tend to be centered around grief. Why? Because the anxiety is coloring and corrupting everything. And listen to what Hannah says here. Up until now, all I've done is complain and grieve. Hannah, what does your prayer life look like? Oh, I just praying. Anything happening there? No, just seem to be drawing a blank. Is your prayer life looking like that? Think back to the way you pray. Do you just complain to God? Do you just bring grief to God? Hannah is dialing into something in this process of her engagement with God where she is removing complaint and grief up until this point. And it resonates with Eli because he says this. Then Eli answered and said, well, go in peace. Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition which you have asked him. Now here's the thing. Eli has no idea what she prayed. All he's seen is lip syncing, right? He thinks the woman's drunk. And Eli, the priest, says, well, look, whatever just happened down there, God, I pray that God grants that because I'm connecting with and resonating with the way in which you prayed. The way in which you prayed was invoking your emotions, your whole body, you're grieving, you're weeping, you're lying flat on the floor, and something is happening right over there in Hannah's little prayer corner. And I wish everybody would pray like that, so may God grant that thing. And here's the deal. What it says next is so amazing. Verse 18. And she said, let your maidservant find favor in your sight. So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. So Hannah leaves the temple. She's eating. She's no longer sad. What happened? Is she going back home and there's a baby there? No. Is Penny still going to be there with all those kids making her life miserable? Well, yeah. Absolutely nothing has changed, and yet everything has. Why? Because she dealt with her anxiety. She unlocked locked doors, and she dealt with it. Not with a drug. Eli didn't slip her any kind of substances over there. There wasn't, any side businesses where she could go to there and get some pills. No, all of this is simply her dialing in and connecting with God. Everything had changed, and yet nothing had changed. Now I'm gonna just get back into some big words here, but I want to introduce to you a concept called neuroplasticity. Okay? Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to continually reorganize itself by forming new connections throughout life. This phenomenon is referred to as neuroplasticity. Now, I talk about this when I'm talking to people who have porn problems, and here's why. It's shown that the process of looking at those images actually rewires and reorganizes the brain to just the way it receives its dopamine fixes and all of the things that come from the excitement of that it actually rewires the brain to where you don't look at women the same way you did before. It literally is causing brain damage. Why? Because the repetitive motion of doing certain things rewires and reorganizes the brain. Now, what we're seeing at a neurological level is that anxiety does the same thing. When you focus on your anxiety and all those things, it couples into the prayer, the way we pray. Right? What did Hannah say? All I did was complain and grieve. Every time I went to church, every time I prayed, all I did was grieve and complain. And if you were to ask the spouse of somebody who has anxiety issues, they would say, all they do is complain and grieve. Why? The process of doing and letting anxiety be suppressed and never deal with it affects us at a neurological level. And it's actually affecting your brain. It's affecting you because you've suppressed things, and the suppression is something that happens body, soul, mind, and spirit. At the intellectual level, you know what happened. You remember. Actually, many times, never forget the things that brought in and manifest themselves as anxiety. And what Hannah did is actually engage neuroplasticity, and she actually changed some wiring around by emptying and ridding her soul of all the things that we saw within the Scriptures. The fact that she has no kids, all of the voices that were speaking into her, and all the things that she was hearing. And instead of hearing those, she began to hear the voice of God. So much so that she invoked His kingdom over hers and says, Lord, if you give me a kid. If you don't give me a kid, I'm cool with it. I'm still going to praise you. No kid, no nothing, which is why, even though she left the temple and had no kids and was still going into Peninnah's world where she had all the kids and had all the affirmation from society, and the same people at the temple were still there giving her those jarring looks, right? And you know what those are. All of that still remained. Hannah gets up, eats, her face is no longer sad. The power of what the Scriptures give us. Even before we knew about the word neuroplasticity, the Scriptures are engaging it. Even much so that we see it. We see it in Philippians chapter 4. Now check this out. And I'm leaving you with this scripture. Many of you have seen this before, right? We invoke it. I actually was going to go here for the whole crux of the sermon, and the Lord said no. He said, do it here. But be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer. Okay, we do that all the time. I'm praying. And supplication. What's supplication? Supplication is that pouring out of the soul. It's a begging of God. Now, I don't know about you. You may be a little more proudful than me or whatever, but I don't like to beg. I like to earn my keep. I like to work for what I get. I got a sense of the good pride, right, that we call it. But does that manifest itself in the way that you pray? in that you don't beg God for anything because you've got a handle on it. Man, I got that stuff locked in. I got some doors and deadbolts on that, and nobody knows about the things that are going on in my life. And yet, everybody sees it. Everybody saw Hannah's condition. Everybody saw Hannah's plight. No, he says, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And what happens? Okay, when you pray that way, when you pray with prayer, and who are you praying to? You're praying to Christ, right? We're praying to Jesus, not Allah, not Buddha. Prayer and supplication, the begging and pouring out of the soul to God with thanksgiving, invokes the peace of God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding. I shouldn't be at peace. Hannah shouldn't have been at peace. Nothing had changed. Nobody solved her problem. Nobody said, oh, call this 1-800 number and you can adopt a kid today, right? We'll even pay for the adoption and you'll have a kid and it will solve all your problems. She didn't need a kid. And God knew that. That's why her womb was closed. She needed God first. And what did God do later? He opens her womb and she has not just one kid, but many. So he says, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. What we see here is not just a temporary peace, but this peace actually stays off anxiety. Anxiety is not allowed here. Now, the word guard here is translated keeper. And you know what comes to my mind? A soccer goal. Right? You ever see those boys? Those keepers in soccer, they got those big hand things and they're like flipping and diving and nothing's getting into that goal. That's exactly what the peace of God does. Devil's trying to kick anxiety into your goal. Peace of God says, no dice. I'm going to keep that thing out of here. It's like a long-legged, fella just keeping everything out. That is what the peace of God was doing in Hannah's life. It's why, okay, she goes back in, Penny makes some sarcastic remarks. She's good. I'm going to eat some more hummus and chips. I know they had that then. I don't know what else they ate. I'm going to eat some hummus and chips, man. I'm good. I'm good. Because God's got this. I may never have a kid. I don't care. And if God gives me one, I'm giving that kid right back to her because it's not about me. God is giving me the peace that I so desperately need. Nothing can be done without Christ. Nothing. The linchpin in all of this is through Christ Jesus. It's through Jesus. A pill didn't solve Hannah's anxiety. And a pill may not solve yours either. Are you suppressing things? Are you letting the peace of God rule your hearts and minds? That's a question that you have to ask. And are you willing to do like Hannah did and come up to these altars and just pour out your soul to God? You say, God, I'm tired of living like this. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of not having Thanksgiving. See, Hannah was able to be thankful. She went home. I got a great husband. I'm glad I don't have to do laundry. I got servants for that. She didn't even have a washing machine. And she's thankful. You got washing machines. She's like, man, I'm blessed. I can be thankful for what God's given me. Sure, my circumstances haven't changed, but I don't have to remove anxiety out of my life to have a life full of peace. There's going to be an element of stress in our lives as we move forward with it. The key is, how are you dealing with it? Are you trying to handle it yourself? Are you willing to invoke God and His power and His peace?
Thanks again for downloading audio from Crosspoint Church. We hope that this content was supplemental at best in your spiritual growth. We believe the best way for someone to grow in their relationship with Jesus is in a local congregation of believers with like faith, passion, and direction. We hope you will go further in your exploration of Crosspoint by visiting us one Sunday at our worship gatherings. Details are on our website, crosspointga.com. God bless.